I'd like to note that I, myself, am not a Therian. This video will consist of research to the best of my ability, as well as interviews with Therians who agreed to share their thoughts on what Therianthropy means to them. So, what makes a Therian a Therian? How do you know if you're a Therian? Can anyone be a Therian? And what's the difference between Therians and Furries? And more importantly, where did this all start? Let's find out. Hi everyone, I'm Stormi, and this is my analysis on Therianthropy. Therians, aka Therianthropes, are people who experience animalistic traits. Basically, they feel more like an animal than a human. They could be foxes, bears, snakes, wolves, and so on. Sensations like having a phantom tail are commonly shared sentiments in the Therianthropy community, but don't necessarily indicate that one is a Therian. Just because you have a phantom tail, for example, doesn't mean you're a Therian. Just because you wear a fox mask doesn't mean you're a Therian. But we'll get into that later. More importantly, however, Furries and Therians are not the same thing. Furries are fans of anthropomorphic animals. Therians are people who feel that on a spiritual or mental level, they're an animal living in human form. Not all furries are Therians, and not all Therians are furries, but some furries are Therians, and vice versa. Wearing a fursuit doesn't make you a Therian. Believing you identify as a non-human animal, however, might be a different story. If I believed I were actually a blue Folf, that wouldn't make me a Therian, but rather otherkin, who are individuals that believe they're a mythical or a fantasy creature. For me, however, my fursuit is just a way to escape reality for a day. I'm just a boring old human, I'm afraid. But despite extensive documentation on what it means to be a Therianthrope, much of it can seem ambiguous. Two Therians might have two different answers on what it means to be a Therian. I'd like to note that I, myself, am not a Therian. This video will consist of research to the best of my ability, as well as interviews with Therians who agreed to share their thoughts on what Therianthropy means to them. One doesn't become a Therian so much as they discover they've been a Therian their whole life, and perhaps even a past one, or even have lived as an animal in a past life or lives. They may believe their Therianthropy is a result of a lost soul or spirituality, or for psychological reasons, be it neurological abnormalities or a past traumatic event. The path to discovering one's Therian connection is wide and vast. There's no initiation to becoming a Therian either. If you're a Therian, well, you just are. So where did this all begin? While the earliest notations of the phrase Therianthropy date back to the early 1900s, impressions of this mythological shape-shifting ability have long existed as part of cave drawings like the Sorcerer around 14,000 years ago. But fast forward to the 1990s and onwards, we're seeing a meteoric rise in those who identify as Therians. Speaking of which, let's interview some Therians.
Hi there, it's Protowave. I just wanted to make a note about my role in this video. All of the interviews Stormi conducted were originally over text only. My job was to provide a voice for what was written. I didn't originally write any of them. The thoughts and opinions in each interview are not my own, and they belong to their respective original writers.
How did you know or find out you're a Therian?
That's not that easy to answer, honestly. I became fully aware of it around October 2021, where I also started to break free of the indoctrination of my parents and started discovering myself more thoroughly. I've always kind of had an inkling that something was different about me. If that was autism or Therianthropy, I couldn't possibly say. I found out about it quite randomly, actually. First, as is the case with many Therians, I stumbled across the furry community, to which I felt a draw of some kind. Then later, though I sadly can't remember the exact circumstances, I came across the Therian community on Reddit, where I asked many questions. There, by pure chance, I met one of my earliest internet friends, and on a fateful Friday night, I was sure about being Therian.
What does Therianthropy mean to you?
It is but a part of my identity, kind of like my gender. It doesn't affect my life hugely, luckily, and so I can go about my business mostly normally. Therianthropy is also but a branch of the umbrella term of alter humanity, which, well, encompasses all feelings of not being human. Therianthropy most commonly is defined as feral animals that exist or have existed on Earth.
What are some common misconceptions about Therians?
There are two big ones, and those are quite harmful. The first being that all Therians are either open zoophiles or condone that stuff. So far, there is only one individual I had the displeasure of making contact with, and they were basically immediately shunned. We may feel like we are non-human animals, but we still have morality. Second comes what we call TikTok Therians. Those are mostly children who have picked up the term somewhere and now make it a quirky hobby. Obviously, this gives us quite bad publicity, which is, well, not necessarily dangerous, but at the very least harmful to our cause. As every community of minorities, we wish to be accepted so that we may live our lives to the fullest without fear or prejudice. Also, I'd like you to add that all of this is but a personal perception, down to the little definition I gave. The community is way too diverse to have basically any universal concept, and we're still quite prone to gatekeeping in some places.
I then asked another Therian what it means to them and got a very similar response.
Ah, yes. What it means to me is having a human body, but my spirit is an animal spirit, in my case, equine. In my opinion, it's not far removed from transsexuality and the dysphoria it causes. I've long called myself transsexual and transspecies before I knew it actually had a name, Therian. While it's obviously possible to change the body to match the transsexual mind or spirit, it's not yet possible to change the body to match the transspecies mind or spirit.
So from what I gathered, Therianthropy is kinda like gender identity in that it's something you learn about yourself. And TikTok has a problem with peeps turning Therianthropy into a hobby of sorts. I'm personally not a big fan of TikTok myself, but I think this part has more to do with people doing things only for the sake of attention, and on the world's most popular app, people are gonna notice for better or worse. Some of the more popular Therian TikToks involve something called Quadrobics, aka quads, a sport where one performs tricks like walking, running, jumping, etc. on all four legs, hence the phrase quad. Quadrobics is not exclusive to Therianthropy. They are completely and totally separate things. Quads does not make you a Therian. Let's make that clear. For example, Colin McClure is currently the fastest person on all fours, and surprise, surprise, he's not a Therian. He just does quadrobics for the sport. And as cool as this looks, it also looks so uncomfortable. Maybe if I just, hang on a second. Okay, ow! My point is, you don't need to do quads or own mask gear to be a Therian. They can be a fun way of expressing yourself, but have no bearing on your identity. It's something only you can decide, and no amount of hypermobility can change that. Some Therians report a sensation of limbs or appendages that, despite not physically existing, they can feel them anyway, like tails, extra legs, and so on. These are what's known as phantom limbs.
Do you know how, when, or where you discovered you had phantom limbs?
Yes, it started when I was a kid. The night before school started, I had a dream that some people put orange spider legs around my waist. When I woke up, they felt like they were still there. The spider legs persisted throughout several days until it turned into something else. In the community, it's known as having a phantom shift. It's a fairly uncomfortable experience. I don't know how to describe it because it's not exactly pain. My body clenches up and my mind goes into a sort of trance state that lasts for about 20 minutes. While it's happening, I can feel it becoming active. I can always feel it, but it basically stays in sleep mode.
When I asked if they considered themselves to be Therian or otherkin, I got a surprising no.
And although these phantom syntheses are often felt amongst the Therian community, they're not exclusive to it, just like quadrobics. Again, Therianthropy is a belief that one is part non-human animal. You could have these sensations, these feelings, and still not be a Therian. That belief is, again, something you, and only you, can decide. Many Therians often make their discovery in their own sleep. I've spoken to at least 3 Therians who discovered they were a Therian in their dreams of all places.
So basically, I dreamed of being a medium-sized canine of some sort. Like, it was detailed to the point where I actually felt the anatomy of a four-legged animal. My hands and feet didn't feel like my human hands or feet. It felt like I was walking on the part of my hands where the bases of my fingers were, and the tips of my toes. I really didn't feel the heels much, and I felt the sensation of paw pads, and it felt completely natural. I had a long nose that I kinda saw, but it didn't block my vision that much. I remember running in an open forest area with a bunch of grass, and everything smelled enhanced. Kind of like when you smell the plants first bloom in the spring. Strangely enough, the grass was not green, but brownish. Actually, all the colors seemed toned down for some reason. I also felt that I had a tail that I could wag. I don't remember if it was fluffy or not, but yeah, I don't remember doing much other than running and walking around. I had that dream about 6 years ago, and I never had one like that since, sadly. I think what triggered that dream was some animal documentary on foxes and wolves I was watching on YouTube.
As cool as it may sound, it wasn't so pleasant for this Therian.
I woke up in sweat and tears. It felt so real. I was roaming around a field with dying or dead grass. The woods were behind me. While I was out there, I noticed some guy walking towards me on the other side of the field, possibly around 100 meters. I noticed he was carrying a rifle in his hands. In my mind, I yelled out, "Oh shit!" and darted into the woods. I ran past the trees, but had to stop dead on my tracks because of a large fallen tree in front of me. I looked upwards and saw a rusty metal sign. I don't remember what that sign said, sadly, but after looking at it, everything went black for what felt like an eternity. Then I woke up in sweat and tears.
In any case, Therians are pretty much everywhere, just as furries are. Most don't publicly broadcast it to the world, outside of their online aliases, of course. And that person behind you at the supermarket might be a Therian, and, well, you just never know. Many keep their identity in private, go about their business, and just get through life like everyone else. Again, Therianthropy is nothing new. People are just becoming more open about themselves. They've always been around us. The topic of Therianthropy is wider than the cosmos of the universe itself. We've yet to discuss things like different types of Therians, like polytherians, non-shifting Therians, contherians, and so on. It's important to note, however, that no single Therian has to fit into a certain box, as Therianthropy is more of a spectrum in this regard. There's also shifting, which refers to the process of transforming into one's inner animal, whether it be through dreams, feelings, or other types of sensations or beliefs. The list is practically infinite, with physically shifting being the most controversial, which is actually condemned by a majority of the Therian community. Honestly, all of this really could fit into several extra videos of their own, but if you'd like to hear more on Therianthropy, let me know down below. I may not be a Therian myself, but the psychology of it all and the feelings Therians experience absolutely fascinates me. Special thanks to all the anonymous Therians who took the time to tell me their Therianthropic thoughts, and of course, therianguy.com for enlightening me on the subject. Anyway, if you found this helpful, informative, or interesting, like this video, subscribe, and consider supporting me on my Patreon for perks like early access to vids, my Discord server, and more.